Hi, it's Dr. Rebecca Cooper, and this is another video in our series on COVID. And in this video, we're going to be talking about testing, who should test and when to test. So, if you have any symptoms, even if you're just sort of vaguely not feeling right, or any mild symptoms of a cold, you should test for COVID. If you are a close contact of a confirmed positive case, you should test for COVID after 5 days if you don't have any symptoms. So a close contact is someone who has had more than 15 minutes at less than 1 meter or 6 feet of exposure. If you have not been wearing masks or sanitizing your hands or using the correct social distancing. So longer than 15 minutes at a distance shorter than 1 meter. So would make you a close contact. Typically, these are people you live with. When you live with people, you don't wear your masks around the house. Normally, you have close contact with people and you have a high risk exposure. So, for example, when I tested positive for COVID, my husband is a close contact of me. However, he didn't have any symptoms. Therefore, he doesn't test until at least 5 days after his last contact with me. The reason for this is if we test sooner than that, he's very likely to have a false negative. So my husband and my children isolated at home for at least 5 days. In their case, they then did not have any symptoms, so they didn't test, they isolated for a further 5 days. And so those are the two options. 5 days after your last exposure, if you have no symptoms, you can test. And then depending on your test result, either if it comes back positive, you then have to isolate or you return to the outside world. Or you isolate for your full 10 to 14 days if you have no symptoms at all. What is very important to note, a false negative is much more likely than a false positive. So if you test positive, there is no reason to retest. If you retest and get a negative, that doesn't mean that the false positive was wrong. It is much more likely the negative is wrong. So a positive is a positive. If you test negative but have all the symptoms, treat yourself as a positive. It is safer for you to treat yourself as a positive than to treat yourself as a negative and actually be positive. So please note, a false negative much more likely than a false positive. If you have tested positive, there is no reason to retest. None of the protocols state you need to retest before going back to work. 10 to 14 days after your onset of symptoms or your positive results, you may go back to work. You do not need to retest to go back to work. So yes, if you test positive, there's no place for retesting. And a false negative is much more likely than a false positive.